This is Will Friedle, the voice of the future Dark Knight, Batman Beyond, and you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app. And remember a few things. First, Dana deserves better. And second, I am Batman.
In the year 2039, Gotham City has no heroes. Its people, no hope. Its youth, no future.
Evening, boys and girls. Who's up for some laughs?
Terry McGinnis was part of the problem.
Freeze right there.
You can't control your temper, and you better if you expect to get anywhere in life.
Yeah, I'll be a big success, just like you.
Until a moment of violence brought him to the door of a man named Bruce Wayne.
Let's put a smile on his face.
Leave him alone. Once known as the Batman.
Man, you're something. You okay?
Now, the Dark Knight will rise again to drive the shadow of evil from the streets of Gotham. Let's go! Supervillains, beware! There's a new Batman in town. Batman Beyond. You're pretty strong for some clown who thinks he's Batman. I am Batman. Justice returns to Gotham. Welcome to my world.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 172 of the DCAU Review. I am Liam, and with me, as he always is Cal. Cal, we are here with yet another episode of Batman Beyond to talk about this week with quite a few familiar and some returning faces.
Faces is the key word there. Few faces, absolutely. We'll get into that in just a second. But yes, this week we are covering the next episode of Batman Beyond as we continue through the original airing date order, or the order at least that's on the DVDs and streaming services. That's right, this week we are covering the Batman Beyond episode Plague, which features the return of the Stalker and also introduces Batman to a organization that will eventually make its face, known again and again and his continuity, that being the terrorist organization of Cobra. No, not that Cobra, and not the one that fights G.I. Joe, and no, not the Cobra spelled with the C that you might be familiar with from the Marvel Universe. No, this is Cobra with a K, Liam. K-O-B-R-A, Cobra.
What kind of madmen would misspell a word to name their organization?
Evil, pure evil. That's how you know their minds are twisted. But yes, I'm excited to tackle this episode with you today. This episode is one that I do recall watching a few times when we were growing up. One that I've revisited a few times since these have been put out on DVD and Blu-ray. It's definitely a fun episode because you get a villain-hero team-up, something that you don't always get to see, all in the name of the greater good. But yeah, we'll get into that in just a second. I'm sure you have the Imdb synopsis for this week's episode ready to go, as this episode originally aired, Liam, back on April the 15th, 2000, meaning we again just passed the 21-year anniversary of this episode debuting.
That is right, Cal, and this is for the episode Plague, which was written by Rich Fogel, directed by Butch Lukic, with music by Lolita Ritmanis, and animation by Coco/Dong Yang. And that synopsis reads as such. Batman and Stalker must work together to stop the Cobra cult from unleashing a fearsome bioweapon on the populace.
That's a great synopsis in my book.
That's a really solid one.
That's good. That's one that you could read in the TV guide back in 2000, probably.
Absolutely.
If you're wondering what's coming up this week. But yeah, so we open up as we are at Gotham International Airport, I guess, with Terry and Blade and Dana. Dana still with Terry after all this. And they're there. At least Terry accompanied them, even though he has no business being there, as they are meeting Nelson Nash as he's returning from a vacation. And we see Nelson actually coming through customs as he stopped as he's going through. The agent asks us if he had anything to declare, and of course, Nelson, being the blockhead meathead that he is, decides to declare that Saint Denis is the place to party, or they party hard, or something like that. And as the agent goes through his bag, he discovers this odd green glowing tube containing some sort of liquid, and begins to pretty heavily question Nelson as to what it is. Nelson reveals that he put his bag down to use the restroom at some point, didn't take his bag with him, and assumes that somebody slipped it in at that point. Nelson, again, not the sharpest tool in this shed, didn't figure out that at this point that in a normal situation he probably would have been arrested, or at least taken in for questioning. But this, what we can assume is a stand-in for a TSA agent, decides, well, at this point, we'll just let you off with a warning. Be more careful next time where you put your bag. I'm going to hold on to this mysterious liquid, and I'm going to let you go.
Mr. Nash, anything to declare?
Yeah, Saint Denis party's hearty.
I meant, do you have any restricted items in your possession?
Peg it. I got nothing to hide.
What's this?
Jeez, how'd that get in there?
You tell me.
Well, I don't know. Someone must have stuck it in at the airport. Like when I went to the bathroom.
You let this bag out of your sight?
Well, I had to. The stall was too small. I was desperate. You gotta believe me, I've never seen it before in my life. Honest.
Go on. Next time, Mr. Nash, keep a closer eye on your bags.
Yes, sir, definitely. Thank you, sir.
And as soon as Nelson leaves, the security checkpoint shuts down completely. And that sort of is where we reveal that maybe this agent is a little bit more than meets the eye to him than at first appearance.
Yes, another 80s cartoon designed to sell children cheap plastic. Yes. That's where we get the reveal that not only is this mysterious man, who we will find out a little bit later is False Face, actually a villain from the comics, going very far back into the comics history for this one, but he's and in fact we get our first look at Cobra One, the leader of this Cobra cult, and their first appearance in the series. They become a pretty recurring villain throughout the rest of the series here, but yeah, we see that, and at the same time as Nelson and Terry and Chelsea and Dana are all walking out to the car, getting ready to head out from the airport, they are accosted by a returning face, that being the Stalker, returning after his first appearance in Bloodsport. And he is this time not going after Terry, but is instead going after Nelson, and begins to sort of interrogate and rough him up to try to figure out what happened to this mysterious green vial.
Hey! Wait a minute! Wait! What do you want? Stop!
Where is it? Where's the glass container?
I don't know.
Liar!
Oh, please don't! The customs guy took it. Honest.
Which is when it's sort of revealed soon after, as Stalker goes to try to confront False Face, but is cut off by Batman. And after a brief scuttle, we actually get a reappearance of a character we just met last week, Agent Bennett. No green glasses this week.
He's ditched his eyewear. Maybe he had LASIK surgery in between episodes.
That's right. It's a possibility. But we see him briefly in this episode as he informs Batman not only that Cobra is in town and they've gotten their hands on this bioweapon, but also that the Stalker has been tasked with bringing the virus in and also stopping this False Face character. So that's sort of our blueprint for the rest of our episode, as it's Batman and the Stalker sort of teaming up, going from location to location, looking for Falseface, looking for this virus, and some pretty fun sequences that we'll definitely talk about when we get to visuals of them sneaking into these facilities. And Terry gets a little help from Bruce as to where they should go for the first location, and they find this sort of secret Cobra facility inside of a sweatshop, as it's referred to. Apparently
Definitely
they still have those just in the middle of Gotham City.
It's definitely set up like a gym, though. They call it a sweatshop, but that's a poorly named.
I guess it's a play on words. It's not a literal, poorly ventilated factory from the 1920s
for children or the poor. Yes. No. Not an actual sweatshop. It would be some sort of gymnasium. And as Stalker and Batman sort of do their investigation, Stalker is clearly the headstrong one that's ready to smash things and make as much noise as possible, and Batman sort of has to rein him in a few times to keep him from making too much noise. And then they eventually get to this part where they see that there is still a presence of Cobra at this area. They have a giant computer featuring their own logo, as you pointed out. As we're watching this, they must have hired a graphic designer at some point to design themselves a very fancy logo. And as they're sort of doing some reconnaissance there, something triggers Stalker to leap into action at that point and starts kicking some tail. And we very quickly realize that Terry's a little upset because he was kind of doing his reconnaissance. He remembered that he could turn invisible for a change and was sort of sneaking around. And as Stalker jumps into action and begins kicking people's tails, they realize that at this point they have no leverage to figure out just who and where the whereabouts of Falseface could be, because ultimately that is who they're going to try and get in touch with.
So what part of wait here didn't you understand?
Never hesitate. In the jungle, it's kill or be killed.
This isn't the jungle. And this isn't Falseface. We can't even ask where he is.
Perhaps I was impatient.
You think? There's gotta be a clue somewhere.
Every pack has its alpha dog. You could see it in their eyes. They followed this one.
So, and ultimately who they're after. So, he quickly grabs one that he identified as the leader and begins to threaten him.
Yeah, I mean I don't even know if you could call this a B plot to the episode, but if there is a B plot, I guess it's this. It's the buddy cop kind of, the two characters learning to work and
lethal weapon
and play to each other's strengths. Where yes, Stalker runs in and knocks everybody out, so Terry can't question any of them. But then he was smart enough to sort of pick out which one of them was the leader, and they're able to sort of search his pockets and find a disc which has a blueprints for a factory on it, and they're able to sort of figure out that that's where Cobra's going next. And that's sort of where we, as you mentioned, Cal, sort of begin to learn the larger plan here, which is if the U.S. government does not meet Cobra's demands, that they're going to coat they're in basically what is a factory that makes the credit card.
Just credits, they're called. But yes, they're credit cards.
Well, yeah. I don't know if we've ever talked about this at length, but in Batman Beyond, nobody has cash. They just have like hundreds of credit cards that are just called credits that you swipe that I guess have a cash value to them.
I think they didn't predict a lot in this, but the disappearance of cash is something that they were fair. It's fair to say that they were pretty in step with here. That physical cash was going to go away at some point, or for most places.
Yeah, definitely. But that's so. Yeah, they're going to coat all of these credit chips with the virus and unleash them. There's like a little imaginary montage featuring Dana and Chelsea trying on clothes at the mall, and then they show them taking the credits out of their wallet, handing it to the cashier. The cashier scans them and then puts them in his cash register and or his credit register, I guess. And how that'll unleash the bioweapon in a way that would be almost untraceable, but also completely unstoppable to anyone. So you do set up that the Cobra is very, very willing to just unleash this. Like, they want the money, but they're pretty much equally okay with just large scale genocide.
Yeah, they're not afraid. They're not afraid to lose a lot of lives. I think the one of the cliffhanger commercial breaks is talking about how 15 million people are basically going to be exposed as the NSA sort of details their plot to or their worries about what Cobra is going to do with this virus. They do mention also at one point, I think in that explanation, if we failed to mention it, that Cobra had tested this in a small area of this island, same island that Nelson just came from, by the way, but that they happened to have it wiped out crops, it wiped out livestock, it wiped out people. It was it's very deadly is kind of what they've established here. So at that point, Stalker and Batman head to this factory where they've gotten the blueprints from it, and when they arrive on the scene, they immediately jump into action and start taking on some of the Cobra agents, I guess is fair to say. I don't know what they're, soldiers, Cobra team members, I don't know, family, I don't know what they are, but it's taking them on, and Falseface is spotted as Stalker sort of begins to pursue him, and in the mayhem, the vial gets kicked around out of his possession and is almost smashed and released by this credit machine. I guess this credit.
Well, it would machinery. Be a printing press, but they're not. It's not paper, so I don't know what's printing on them. But
yeah, I guess there's a mention before that they're unmarked creds. So this is somehow denoting marked creds. I don't know. So they mark the creds with this machine, and it's sort of, like you said, like a giant impacting press on this square sheet. So the virus lands on the conveyor belt and is about to be smashed, and Batman has to fly through, save it, and in the meantime is crashes into giant stacks of credits that are immediately bury him. So this distracts Stalker enough to make sure that the virus itself hasn't been released. So he goes to check on Batman, and at this point, then Falseface escapes. And in case we haven't talked about it either, Falseface is Falseface because the man can change his face. Very a very Clayface sort of think Matt Hagen in Feet of Clay Part 1, where he just sort of puts his hands up to his face and sort of rubs it around. Liam, do you have any headcanon as to where Falseface's powers come from? Because we don't really get a backstory, and there's no other appearances of him. So, is this somehow related to a Roland Daggett thing?
I think so, because near the end of the episode, he is in disguise, and he's punched by Batman, and we see his sort of true form, which also sort of resembles his more recent comics appearance. He's just this really jacked up, like his lip, like he has like a hair lip, and he has no hair on his head, and he's just really
got a bulgy eye,
and like no eyebrows, and it's just very disfigured. Like you said, looks very similar to Matt Hagen in that. So yeah, I think he got his hands on some Renew You, perhaps, or a later version of that product.
Maybe it was injected with it at some point.
Could
or something.
Be. Yeah, we don't know, because I mean, it's established that he's kind of a mercenary. He's not really in the cult with Cobra, and in fact, as we come to find out, he's actually being used by them quite literally in this plot. But yeah, so I like to think that it's somehow connected to the Roland Daggett legacy of
headcanon. Works here. It's canon until proven otherwise.
They've had a long time to give him a real origin, and have never got around to it. I don't believe he ever comes back in the series. So that's what I'm going with, and there is sort of a clay material to it when he's getting knocked around. So
that's right.
I think that works.
Well, we learn in this fisticuffs as he escapes, and we actually get the Stalker is able to shoot sort of a flash grenade at him that hits him and knocks him down, but he's still able to escape in the process. Stalker at this point is when he grabs the Cobra agent and begins to question him as to what their plans are at this point, and he says that at this point your plans have been foiled, so it really doesn't matter what happens. And he notices there's a bit of a smug look on the Cobra One's face, which then reveals that they had a backup plan and sort of a sub-plan to their initial plot.
Call your pal Bennett. Tell him the worst is over.
Is it?
Hello? We just kicked your scaly butts.
He knows something.
What?
It's not over, is it? What have you done? Tell me.
It's false face. He's been infected. He's a carrier, but he doesn't know it. It was our backup plan in case your government resisted. Soon he'll become virulently contagious. You'll never find him. Cobra has won.
And that is that they've already infected Falseface with the virus, and that it's a highly contagious virus at that, so that basically any people that he comes in contact with are at risk at that point for getting the virus. So it's at that point it's a race against time, and Batman and Stalker have to do their best to not only stop Falseface from escaping so that he doesn't spread this virus everywhere, but also they have to make sure that the people that he's coming in contact with, actually they don't really, he comes in contact with a lot of people and they don't really say, it's like, do those people have to be hospitalized?
They make mention that he's not contagious yet, but within like an hour he'll be contagious.
All right, well that's how they get rid of it. All right, so that makes sense at that point. So yeah, it's a literal race against time at that point to get him contained before the becomes contagious. So at that point there's a pursuit, and they're really not sure how they're going to find him, but wouldn't you know it, something from the original Stalker episode, Bloodsport, comes back into play here. Some great continuity, Liam.
That's right. So as mentioned, he hit him with this grenade that just sort of knocked him down, and then he was still able to get away. But it's revealed that it was actually the same sort of grenade that he had hit Batman with in the previous episode, and that. Not only is it an explosive, but it actually coats the person in a sort of low-level radiation that Stalker can then track with his sort of special enhanced vision that he has. And so they're able to track him down. Stalker confronts him. He's actually taken down by a taser. They even show, we'll get to that in visuals. It's pretty dramatic, but they sort of do a good job of also playing into some continuity there, and that a lot of Stalker's enhancements are in fact mechanical, and so a big jolt of electricity would in fact at least temporarily disable him. But Falseface seems to be about to get away, but he happens to try to disguise himself as Nelson Nash, and Batman's able to find him. Like we said, they have this sort of brief scuffle. They fight out of the mall. They end up in sort of this factory and another factory. A lot of factories in this episode. but yeah, they fight into another factory. A fire is started by Falseface, and Batman's trapped under some rubble that falls, and it seems like all hope is lost, but the Stalker comes back, and there's sort of, the whole episode has been Terry sort of waiting for the shoe to drop, and is he going to attack me? And he raises the spear towards Batman's face, but instead of attacking him, he uses it as a little bit of leverage to free Batman from the fire. They are able to run outside. They see that Falseface has sort of succumbed to the poison and is laying unconscious on the ground, and we get a little bit of a epilogue dialogue there as Stalker mentions that while he does want to kill Batman, that would not have been an honorable death, and that when Batman dies, it'll be by his hand and his hand alone. And Terry's not quite sure whether to feel comforted by that or not, but at least he knows that when if he ever deals with the Stalker again, that it'll be a something resembling a fair fight, I guess. That's kind of where we leave it.
There you go. Yeah, so we I guess we can. Now that we've summarized the episode, we can talk about this. I think the plot for this is really, really strong. I think as a plot device, the superhero teaming up with his reluctantly teaming up with a villain in the past or someone that's been a threat to him is always a great trope, because you have this natural distrust that creates tension between the two characters. It's not as much in this one. It's not focused on the the worry of double cross. Terry doesn't face that too much. He certainly has that moment at the end where he's concerned that he's going to kill him at this point, and it's certainly on the forefront of his mind. But it doesn't feel like there's as much, is he going to join Cobra at some point? It's not that type of tension where you're worried whether or not they're going to stay on the straight and narrow. It's more is this person going to turn around and kill me at some point?
Right.
Which is its own version of tension, That's not to minimize that. So I think that story, though, is great. It gives you an opportunity to see that the Stalker sort of redemption, turn him into a bit of an anti-hero for this episode. That's kind of fun. So you get to see some of the same things that were used against Terry, like we said, in the first episode, are now used, to help Terry. Terry's able to use them as a resource. And you get it adds a little bit of a dimension. Now, I will say, though, there's a little bit of a plot hole here. When we last left Stalker, he was about to be hit by a train and on the train tracks, and we didn't really see a resolution here.
He lost his mind. Like he was gone crazy. He kept seeing like the black and the red of the bat suit was turning into the black and the red of the panther that had nearly killed him. Like he was having a mental breakdown.
So we don't really know what happened specifically to him. All we know that he was he was in the custody of the NSA essentially, or in some sort of holding cell where they go and get him for this. It's a little bit, if you think too hard about it, it's like, this is their only answer to find this guy, is they had to get the Stalker to track this guy down. Like, all right. Well, I get it. He's a master of disguise. He's constantly changing his face. You didn't have like a homing beacon inside him like they could track Zeta. I don't know. It's a little bit of a stretch, but it's fun. I think it makes this episode really fun for the most part.
Yeah, and I think it's, could you have introduced a new character as the tracker? You probably could have.
Sure.
But I think that adds to it. It's like, well, we have a character in this universe already who we've established is like this expert hunter and tracker, so let's just bring him back. And obviously it's a great character. We had so much fun reviewing his first appearance, and sadly this is it for him in Batman Beyond. He does make a cameo later on in Epilogue, the Justice League Unlimited episode, but this is it for his Beyond appearances. He does also have some comic book appearances as well. But this is it. It's such a fun character, and I was glad to see him brought back here. And yeah, maybe they could have played more into the distrust that him and Batman has. Like I said, they go more for a mismatched partners. I can't believe I'm working with this guy type of vibe than a is he gonna stab me in the back type vibe. Other than that little ending, but overall I think it's a fun, thrilling, exciting episode. It feels like there's stakes to what's going on, and that every action feels pretty important in it. So I ended up settling on an 8 out of 10 for plot.
Yeah, that's the exact same score I gave. 8 out of 10. Believe it or not. I'm sure you will believe it if you've listened to this podcast for any of the prior 171 plus episodes. So yeah, it's a fun episode. It does move at a rapid pace, which I love. There's not a lot of downtime. There's a lot of jumping from location to location, which fits well, I feel like, with the plot, because it's a race against time. You're trying to contain this literal virus that's about to spread,
right?
And then you have to stop the person from spreading the virus too. No real world implications here. It doesn't feel at all familiar for us. No, not triggering at all for anybody who's lived here the last 2 years on Earth.
It's definitely not anxiety inducing to see a man infected with a deadly plague just running through a mall.
I was thinking, we joked as we were watching it. I joked as we were watching. I was like, man, that like Stalker should be screaming, "Get the vaccination! Get the vaccination!"
He should have the Moderna on that spear of his. Just throw it at him.
Yeah, but so it's funny that there are some real world implications and certainly reminders here as we watch this. But it's pretty fun overall. I think seeing Batman work with one of his adversaries and get some redemption out of the character, I think is fun too. Yeah, again, it's a shame we don't get a follow up, round 3 between Batman and Stalker, but yeah, that probably would have been fun to see ultimately in the series. But overall, I think it's a very fun episode, and it's a good 22 minutes to sit down and enjoy.
Agreed. And that will move us on to our second category here, Cal, which of course is visuals and animation. This week's episode, once again, directed by Butch Lukic with animation by Coco and Dong Yang. This one's fun. I think there's obviously the first thing we have the Cobra guys, which I don't. You have a lot of them that are just these very generic green suited guys.
They're expendable. It's the red shirts from Star Trek. It's a stormtrooper. It's Cobras.
The Neo Vipers from G.I. Joe.
That's right.
Funny enough. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, they're just very expendable. They all look the same. It's the CGI army from any superhero movie from the last 10 to 15 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Nothing distinct about them. But I like that they look different than the actual leader. Like the leader has that gold suit. Cobra 1 has the gold brown orangish tan tint to them, whereas the lackeys are all obviously identified via the green suits.
Yeah, no, I think that looks pretty good. And yeah, there's a lot of fun. Like you said, it's funny. We mentioned there's a lot of like factories and stuff in this episode, but that whole sequence from when Batman and Stalker are teaming up, where they're sort of sneaking through this gym, and they're sort of taking out the security cameras one by one, and then they're finding this sort of secret passageway that leads down to the secret headquarters, and then that battle, which again very much coming out of a G.I. Joe cartoon or something. Like
For sure.
It's just this weird room with a big giant computer, and as we mentioned, a Cobra logo on the screen. No doubt that this is an evil villain lair, and yeah, that's a pretty fun sequence. I like the sequence in the credit making factory with the machines and everything going, and Batman, the race there is the vial's about to be crushed, and Batman flies to grab it to avoid it getting crushed, and then flies right into this like big pile of the cards. I think is a clever little bit there, and yeah, I think the overall, once again, I'm sure we talked about this a lot in the first episode, but just the movements of Stalker are so deliberate and so animalistic. And, you know, he's on all fours for a lot of it, and he's shown to have these very powerful legs, and he's leaping, and he doesn't move like... He and Batman move very differently in this episode, which I think is a really cool way to sort of identify his specific sort of training and advantages that he has.
Yeah, he doesn't move, and that's the way it should be, right? Because he's a very unique character. We learned that in the last episode with him in it. Not only that, but he's had this surgery to give him this cybernetic eye and repaired his spine, so naturally he should move a little bit almost mechanically. It is mechanically, but also, like you said, like animalistic. It's very, you know, his arms and legs sort of flail about as he runs, and he's usually carrying this he's carrying his long staff at the same time, and just jumping, and you know, he'll land away, and he puts his hand down when he lands someplace, and just very wild movements, I would say, from him. So the fact that they went out of their way to animate him with that style, yeah, it fits the character very well. I love that. Yeah, for sure. I thought that stood out, and yeah, that final bit there as Terry and the Stalker have tracked Falseface to the mall. There's a shot, as I mentioned, of Falseface tases the Stalker, and you see that mechanical spine light up with electricity as he's sort of twitching, and his hand is kind of moving in a really unnatural way, as you sort of establish once again that this guy is like half robot at this point, right? And then that final bit is as Terry and Falseface are fighting, and the place is on fire. It creates a really dramatic, everything kind of takes on that orange hue of the fire, and it's a pretty dramatic final fight as Falseface kind of keeps getting the upper hand on Terry, and he's wailing on him with like a baseball bat at one point, and we cut at one point to a like the POV shot of Terry's vision with like that the red sort of bat goggles over top of it, and we actually he hits Terry while you're looking through Terry's eyes. It's like this really dramatic, and then you see like the lead pipe sort of bent by Terry's skull. Like, it's a very
it's as violent as you can get for a show that couldn't show blood or dismemberment.
Yeah, there's a couple of those. I'll come back to that scene in just a second, because I think that is where ultimately I think the standout visuals for the entire episode, in an episode that featured quite a few, I think that's ultimately the culmination of that being the scene that we get to where we see a lot of the memorable visuals, I think is worth noting. But I think starting off even where we first see Stalker return, and he swoops down to grab Nelson, and he picks him up and he sticks him kind of on the end of his staff, sort of hanging by his shirt. He sticks the staff under his shirt, so the staff itself is sort of bending back, and then Stalker starts climbing up this building while carrying Nelson hanging on the stick. It's a great visual. We get sort of the side profile of Stalker walking up the side of the building. Not at all could also be, or not confused with a homage maybe to Batman 66, just a slight one, as we see Stalker climbing up the side of the building from that side profile shot there. Nobody popped out of a window to say hello. No celebrities from the late 90s popped out to have a conversation with Stalker. So maybe it's not a direct homage, maybe a coincidence, but I think not, knowing the source material here. And so then he gets to the top of the building and he starts sort of really questioning Nelson as to where the virus is, and the look on Nelson's face of terror as he's sort of hanging off here as the staff barely sticks under his shirt, I thought was done really, really well. I really enjoyed that. I think Falseface as a character, we talked a little bit about that, about the fact that maybe it's inspired directly by Matt Hagen's look, or maybe he had some Renew You somewhere in his DNA at that point. But I love there's the initial scene that final scene where Terry finally gets his hands on him and begins hand-to-hand combat with him. There's a couple of punches that Falseface takes directly to the mug, and one sort of rearranges his face a little bit, and you begin to see that true form. And then there's another one where Terry hits him with an uppercut, and his chin literally flips up over his eyeballs at that point. So his face is sort of caved in. I imagine that probably was a fun one for them to storyboard for this, because it's not every day you get a character that later on, maybe with the elongated man, or if they had introduced Plastic Man into the actual series, you could have had some fun like that. But it's not every day that you get a person with a face that directly bends and wraps around itself like that, like Falseface.
For sure, yeah, that's definitely a pretty striking moment there when it looks like it could almost be like a Popeye character or something. It's definitely that over-the-top cartooniness, but it totally works because of, again, they established earlier in the episode that, when he's not really in control of it, when he's getting knocked around, he kind of begins to lose that shape, and his face is basically putty, as we see throughout the rest of the episode. So yeah, that's a pretty fun sequence, and it leads into that really dramatic finale where his really jacked up face is attacking Batman. And again, you have all those POV shots where it's very, I guess it's almost like a monster movie or something, where he's just running at you almost as he's kind of coming towards the camera, and you see through Terry's eyes.
That's right. And it's interesting. So the Falseface character is, I didn't realize this until we started looking up his history, and you mentioned he was actually a Bill Finger creation. So he's been around since pretty much the beginning at this point, if not somewhat after Batman's creation. So an older character like that they decided to bring into this episode, someone that they hadn't used on Batman the Animated Series, but brought him to the future version. I love the symmetry of that, sort of the book ending of that, like literally one of the first creations from the people that were responsible for creating Batman, and then you take that and you put that in the future, 50 years for the future, whenever now is, and this is what you get out of it. So to incorporate a character like that, a lesser known from the original golden age of Batman, I just love the concept of that, and that the directors and the writers decided to use that for this episode.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a good shot. We talked about how in Beyond, Blight is sort of had some vague basings on Dr. Phosphorus, who's another one of those very early Batman foes that never really made it into the animated series proper, and how they were able to take that old school, that early of an era of Batman, and just seamlessly integrate a character like that into a Batman Beyond episode is great. And I think it also works, and we've talked about it, and obviously especially with a Stalker appearance, we talk quite a bit how influenced by the early Steve Ditko Spider-Man this series was. And how obviously with Stalker kind of being a Kraven the Hunter type character, you also have a version of the Chameleon. Of course, this version not created for the show. In fact, his creation actually predates the Chameleon's appearances in Spider-Man, which, I mean, far be it for me to accuse Stan Lee of taking credit for an idea he didn't actually think of himself.
Well,
that would never happen.
You would never be the first person to do that, though.
Let's
be honest.
That's true.
You would definitely not be the first person if you did.
That's right. But yeah, to see that another character who, even though again not created for the series, but sort of fits that mold of a Spider-Man stand-in or type villain for Terry to contend with is again just a great integration of a character from the comics.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of wrapping up my thoughts on visuals here, I think with the Stalker, having him back and again going back to the continuity of using his sort of bionic eye or whatever you want to call it, that he's able to sort of use that bomb and then use it later on to track, with the dust or the powder, the residue that's left on False Face, to track them. I thought getting the POV shot is great, but also the close up of his eye as it's sort of in use, all black with the green center, as he's also telling Batman, later on that if he's going to kill Batman, or Batman at this point thanks him for saving him, and he says if you're going to die, you're going to die by my hand, and Terry's reaction is thanks, I guess. I love that.
You risked your neck to save me.
It was not your time. When you die, it will be by my hand, and my hand alone.
Thanks, I guess.
And then I think though ultimately the standout scene is that final scene where they land in whatever this factory is that begins to be engulfed with flames as False Face lights this basket of laundry on fire, and then it very quickly the entire place lights on fire. And as you said, the multiple POV shots that we get from Terry's point of view as he's swinging this bat or metal pipe or whatever it is around, and then even the POV shot at the end that we get of Stalker as he has the staff and Terry is stuck under the debris, and the fact that he comes at him straight with his staff, and you think, all right, well, here's the double cross that Terry was maybe afraid of the entire time, and he just uses it to leverage the debris off of Terry so that Terry can escape. I love that. I love the sort of bait and switch there that happened, that you thought what you thought was going to happen didn't ultimately happen. So I think the visuals are definitely the standout for this week's episode. Lots of great things to enjoy. That's why I ended up giving visuals a 9 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I also really enjoyed these, and I gave it a very similar 8 out of 10. Just some really standout stuff, I think, especially as the episode went on. Like I said, I just love the overall, the movements of Stalker really stood out to me as we've talked about, that just how deliberate they were in making sure that he didn't move like any of the other characters in the show. I thought was a really good attention to detail, whether that's more on the direction, the storyboard artists, or the animation, or a combination of all of those. I'm not quite sure, but definitely a great job done by all involved.
Absolutely.
And Cal, that will move us on to our third category, which is, of course, music. And we have music this week by Miss Lolita Ritmanis. And the return of Stalker also returned not necessarily a specific hummable theme, as we've talked about with a lot of the Beyond villains, but he sort of has his own musical style, which is not only this sort of softer, slower percussion, but there's some strings and some horns, and maybe even like a little bit of like chanting or yelling thrown into his scene whenever the Stalker's kind of in action. That sort of general theme and that sort of general style of music kicks in.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a shofar or some sort of horn playing in the background, that anytime that he appears on the screen, you kind of get this subtle blow of this horn in the background, and it sounds, very tribal in nature, I guess you could say. So it plays throughout the entire episode. Pretty much any time that he shows up, it signals that he's kind of arrived on the scene, and then will continue to sort of subtly play throughout the scenes. But you pointed it out right away as we were watching it that that music really slaps, as the kids say. Like, that's, I don't know, do the kids still say it slaps?
Probably not.
They've moved on to something else.
If we know about it, they probably moved on to something else.
Well, we'll say it slaps. We're not the kids anymore, I guess. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. I love that because it combines not only that horn, but then you get a subtle sort of drum beat that comes in here. Very tribal themed drums, a lot of congas, a lot of beats that happen, and that sort of punctuates the music throughout the scenes that Stalker is featured in. And also it sort of ramps up as they're sort of in pursuit of Falseface. It certainly lays down a little bit lower in the backgrounds when you have these intimate scenes between Batman and Stalker, and they're having these conversations. But it's, as I mentioned, it's a pretty action-packed, fast-paced episode, so there's not a lot of breathing time to kind of back off of the music, it felt like, in a lot of points.
Yeah, that definitely gave a rhythm to it that I thought really added and really punctuated a lot of those scenes and really added to that drama. Yeah, there's a lot less of the regular Batman and Beyond music. I think we still get some of that more traditional sort of rocked up music in maybe the credit factory scene and a little bit at the end there when it's just Terry and Falseface before Stalker sort of reappears there. But yeah, I appreciated that, and we talked about that with certain characters, with Stalker, with Curare certainly, and even some of the original Batman episodes, kind of, rather than having a specific villain theme, sort of just having a style of music that accompanies that character's appearances, and I think that really works well for Stalker here, and it gives it a really strong feel throughout the entire episode. And yeah, for all those reasons, I actually went ahead and gave music a 9 out of 10 this week. Nice.
Yeah, music is very strong. I love when we have an episode where the music differentiates itself. Like, obviously, we know that the style of music changes from show to show. For sure. The more orchestral stuff from Superman and from Batman the Animated Series, somewhat continued in the new Batman Adventures, and then this, we know we have the synth and the drums and the guitar, and the Batman Beyond episodes we've talked about, there's a lot of them where the music is in that style of Batman Beyond, but there's not a lot that makes it unique or stand out. And that's okay. Like, we still get you get the idea behind what's happening. It's the theme of the show, but having something that makes it unique enough and stand out. It's like, okay, this is a character in this episode. We want you to know that he's different. When you see him on screen, he's different than everything else what's happening around you. This character changes the tone of what's happening on the screen, changes the mood of what's going on. So I love that because the music plays a big part in that, and then they did that for this week's episode. That's why I actually gave music an 8 out of 10. So
love it. Yeah. I think as we got closer to JLU, they sort of found that sweet spot of, yes, you still have a lot of rocked up music, a lot of guitar, a lot of heavier drums and stuff, but you would still sort of incorporating strings. It was more of a combination of, I think, the previous show's styles, and I think this episode is kind of a representation of when Lolita Romanos, of course, part of the Dynamic Music Partners, along with Michael McQuiston and Christopher Carter. So I think they all sort of were moving in that direction as the series went on, of being able to maybe have the rock music as the base, but also when the character or the story called for it, of being able to switch that up. And I think this episode did a really great job of that.
Yeah, I would agree with it, and I think it reflects on our scores
100%. And that will move us on to our final category here, Cal, which of course is voice acting. Not a huge cast to talk about this week. We have some minor appearances. We do have briefly Rachel Lee Cook returning as Chelsea. We briefly have Lauren Tom as Dana, and of course Seth Green as Nelson, who does actually get to do a little, has some funny moments, both with the false face TSA guy, and then when he's actually interacting with the Stalker himself. Pretty entertaining little bit from a small part from Mr. Green.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't get a whole lot of dialogue. Usually he has a quip or something to say to Terry that that gets under Terry's skin, and he doesn't miss that with this episode. He gets his opportunity to do that again, but yeah, he gets a little bit more to do as Stalker sort of is grilling him to get this information from him, and then his interaction after he survives that interaction with Stalker. He has this interaction again with Blade and with Chelsea, and I think I called her Blade in the opening scene too, with Chelsea and Dana as he's sort of recounting he needs a new pair of shorts. So I think he gets a little bit more to do, and he knocks it out of the park. It's pretty funny.
100%. We do briefly have Joe Spano returning as Bennett. His final appearance in this role, as we mentioned last week, he was recast for the Zeta show. We have Kerrigan Mahan, who is another sort of a regular voice acting choice for the DCAU. See a lot of additional voice credits for him throughout his career, but folks might also know him as a villain on Power Rangers. But he plays the Cobra One, the leader, really the only Cobra guy who gets more than maybe one or two lines of dialogue in the episode. Very, very kind of generic, just sinister, evil guy. Not doesn't really come off as a super charismatic leader, but he's also really not the main villain of this piece. So I think you can kind of forgive that. Our main villain, of course, being we have Townsend Coleman as Falseface, who we've talked about him I think quite a few times on this show, because a lot of times he's playing bit parts, almost voice cameos, but was a prolific voice actor, did a lot of work over the years, including being the voice of the Tick, as well as being the voice of NBC's primetime commercials.
Must See TV Thursday.
That's right, for years and years, and I think still does syndicated voiceover work for when you see reruns of King of Queens or
sure.
Seinfeld or something. You'll still hear his voice sometimes doing those as well. So yeah, he's very good. I mean, you can tell it's him because he has a very recognizable voice.
Did you get it? Very good.
Hold it. I shouldn't be seen leaving work this early. Have to keep up appearances.
But there is a little sinister edge to it that I appreciated.
Yeah, it's good. It's hard because he has such a recognizable voice, and he was such a big part of our childhood for many different voices. And it's hard to pick him out and say, ooh, we've talked about it before. When you hear somebody's voice in a role that you're not used to them,
right? He
was the Tick. He's the voice of the goofy, doofy superhero. That he played for, I think it's only 2 seasons, or ended up being 2 or 3 seasons of that show. But we watched those episodes so many times, the episodes that we had on videotape. So very familiar with that voice in a very different role. So, and it's a comedic role. It's a lighthearted role. It's not this role of serious bad guy. So he does a good job. It's not the same voice. He is able to change his voice up enough where it's not the same voice of the Tick, but at the same time, as soon as I heard it, I was like, oh, it's Townsend Coleman. Here we go. He's very recognizable. He's got a very distinct vocal. So it's just kind of, unfortunately for him, it's kind of hard to unhear that sometimes when you're taking in a performance. With that said, I think if you aren't as familiar with his voice acting, I don't think you'll find an issue with his acting, because I think he does a good job.
For sure. And then our 2 main players, or 3, we get a little bit of Kevin Conroy as Bruce Wayne, still definitely kept to the sidelines in this episode, but get a little bit of him sort of talking things over with Terry and doing a little detective work. But yeah, our main stars of the piece definitely are, of course, Will Friedle as Batman, and Carl Lumbly as returning as the Stalker. It's funny, we just talked about this. A recognizable actor specifically to this cartoon universe,
right?
But I mean, it is. I think it is different enough. Now it's complicated things because it does sound a lot like Anansi the Spider. Who, now that we've also reviewed that episode of Static,
this is true.
I think we even sort of headcanoned that maybe Stalker's a descendant of his.
I love that
in the previous episode.
But, yes, we did.
But yeah, I mean he's not doing the Martian Manhunter voice. It's much less monotone. He's a very, I mean, and that's part of as we've talked about in the plot, is he's this very reactive, or proactive, I should say, character who's constantly willing to spring into action, has this temper on him, and he also has a little bit of an accent to it. So, to me, while I generally agree that it's hard to deal with it when it's an actor you recognize, I do generally really enjoy him as Stalker. Like, I think he does enough to differentiate himself from the Jean performance that I think it still works.
There.
You see him? But how?
My grenade marked him. He won't escape. Stop! Before you infect the entire city.
What?
You have the sickness.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can tell it's Carl Lumbly. You can tell that this voice is Carl Lumbly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very Carl Lumbly voice. He has a very distinct voice, but yeah, the accent certainly makes it a different character. And, I just said, it's hard to not hear that character as another voice. But I think for this episode, and certainly having a prior episode where he's established as this character, it's a little bit easier to accept whether or not, that it's this very well-known voice actor that you're familiar with, and it's not the voice is coming out of a different drawing, basically. So, no, I think he does a good job, and this is a different style of Stalker voice that he plays in this episode. As we said, he's not the adversary of Batman. He's not coming after him. He's not sort of unhinged either. There's a bit of unhinged behavior that you get from his dialogue in that first episode, Bloodsport. Yes. So this one, he's whatever was ailing him has been cured by his time in his rehabilitation cell, I guess, because he's not as unhinged. I do appreciate the little banter back and forth with Will Friedle's Terry. Is again, he's sort of threatening him and letting him know that he could take care of him whenever he needed to, but right now they're fighting for the same cause, so you don't really have to worry about that. So I do love that, and I think they had some pretty good chemistry, and for them to have a different dynamic where it's not you're coming at each other as adversaries, but this time you're coming at each other as allies. I liked that as well, and I think that both men did a pretty outstanding job when it came to their voice performances this week. So I ended up giving voice acting overall, because I think everybody did a pretty good job, an 8 out of 10. What about you?
Nice. Yeah, I went 7 out of 10. I think I could have used a little bit more from the Cobra leader. Like I said, I understand he's not really the main focus of the episode, but it's a very understated performance, and I'm sure Garrett Mahan was just doing as asked and as directed. But so I'm not saying it's a bad performance by any means, but as he's the mastermind behind it all. Especially I think in that last scene where he's sort of revealing that they infected Falseface with this virus, and that he was sort of their contingency plan the entire time. I was a little disappointed with that performance, but overall still very, very strong, and that's reflected in both of our scores.
Absolutely.
And that will bring us to our final scores here, Cal. And tallying everything up, I have a very strong final score of 32 out of 40.
That's funny. I actually ended up with a very strong 33 out of 40. So there you go. I guess no one is surprised listening at home, if you've listened to episodes before, that our scores are very similar. I think for the disagreement alarm, we're just going to have to start anytime we disagree slightly on anything, because that thing is so dusty. We just agree so often on things. But anyway, I guess that's why it's the alarm.
Right.
It's because it's such a rare
occurrence. An emergency.
That's right. It's an emergency to let people know. But yeah, I guess when we talk about rewatchability here, and again, that's been our catch-all for, the importance of the episode. Is it fun enough to watch again if I choose to sit down and watch it? Are you going to recommend it to somebody? So I think we fall into the trap this week again that we have fallen into a few times, which is this episode is integral to the Batman storyline, so the Batman Beyond storyline. So we have the return of Stalker. So we have a villain that reappears for a second time. We have the introduction of a organization, Cobra, that plays in a big part in a couple more episodes. I think at least two more episodes, plus two-parter,
plus the Static Shock crossover as well. So.
Right. So you have an organization that plays beyond this show itself. So in the greater DCAU, I guess you could make the case for that. It's continuity wise, it's important to know who these guys are. But in the grand scheme of things, not a lot changes because of this. It's not necessarily referred back to. We don't get another Stalker appearance here in this series, unfortunately. So I guess the argument could be made to skip it. But I'm going to go ahead and give it a 2 thumbs up. Yeah, I think based on where it lies, the crossover with Static later on, the introduction of Cobra as an organization, the dynamic switch up and sort of redemption of the Stalker character itself. I think all of that is important enough to say, hey, this is a must watch if you're watching important episodes of the DCAU. If you're talking about, the best of the best Batman Beyond episodes, not so much.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's a solid episode, but definitely I think the reappearance of Stalker and the introduction of Cobra is kind of why you would say this episode is important, quote unquote, for sure. So yeah, that will begin to wrap us up here. Thank you everybody for listening, whether you do so on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or on the Pod Tower YouTube channel. We thank you no matter where you listen. If you are listening on an app that allows you to leave a review, we would love it if you would take the time to give us a 5-star review. That does actually really help us. It bumps us up in search algorithms and that kind of stuff. Hopefully would get a few more people to listen to the podcast. We do appreciate those who have already taken the time to do that. And we would love if you could support us either by buying something from our store, which you can find at DCAUreview.com. But, we understand not everyone has the cash to do that.
Of course
and
not.
Totally okay. We respect that completely. But a really easy and free way for you to help us would be to go and subscribe to the Pod Tower YouTube channel. You're not just helping us out, you're also helping out the folks from the Watchtower database, as well as Tim Talk, who also posts content there. You can find every episode we've ever done up there in a nice little curated playlist in order. On the Pod Tower YouTube channel. We would appreciate you subscribing there as well, giving us a like. We would appreciate that. And also follow us on our social medias. You can find us at DCAU Review, both on Instagram and on Twitter. On Twitter, I'm usually there. We're talking all things DC, what we're reviewing, what we're going to be reviewing, other things going on in the world of DC comics and movies and animation. Always love talking to folks there. Tweet us or leave us a comment on our Instagram. Let us know what you thought of this episode, of both of our show and of the episode we're reviewing. And definitely keep letting us know what you'd like to see us review next, as we always like talking with everybody on that.
That's right. And so, Liam, we, believe it or not, so we are coming up on our final week of the month of August here.
Wow.
Time certainly has flown as we've gone here. So with that, with our final Saturday of the month, we've alluded to it a couple times before, but we are actually excited to introduce a new format for this upcoming episode. We're trying something out here. So no secret, we're going to pull the curtain back just a little bit here. But as we discussed, as we reviewed Superman last month, We don't have a whole lot of Superman episodes left, Liam.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple handfuls of episodes that we've been avoiding,
Yes.
and a couple episodes.
Some for good reasons, some for we don't want to review them reasons.
Right, exactly. So we've been avoiding some of those episodes. We've Batman Beyond also has a limited amount that we're going to be left with at this point. So in order to continue to just sort of talk about that, because eventually we're just going to either get to all Batman the Animated Series is what we're going to have to review, which is a good problem to have.
Sure.
But there is, unfortunately, when you're reviewing a product like this that sort of has a beginning and end to we have a limited amount of content to cover. So we are going to try something out next week. We're going to do a feature. We're doing a DCAU Spotlight episode. So what this is going to do is we're going to highlight a specific character, typically one that we've covered their entirety of their run within the DCAU, whether it be a hero, a villain, somebody that's made a big impact on the DCAU. So we're going to do a feature, typically going to try and tie it into whatever show that we're covering that month or whatever theme that we're doing. So this is a brand new thing. We're trying it out. We're going to see how it works and how it's received. So we're going to rely heavily on those listening to let us know, your thoughts on this, whether or not you liked it. So definitely shoot us some feedback after next week's episode. But our DCAU Spotlight next week is our first inaugural one, is actually going to be Batman Beyond related, and that is going to feature Batman's arch nemesis, perhaps his greatest rogue, yet one that maybe we talked about was a little bit underused at times, and that being Derek Powers, aka Blight. So we will be talking about him all week next week. We're going to talk about each one of his appearances on Batman Beyond. We'll talk a little bit about his appearances in tie-in comics as well. Maybe talk a little bit about where he's showed up in main DC continuity, Liam, and then share some of our favorite moments from where he appeared in the DCAU.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a really exciting concept as a way to sort of stretch things out, because we don't want to give up talking about Batman Beyond or Superman or some of these other shows that we're sort of running out of episodes on. We want to continue to be able to discuss these in new and exciting ways, especially because more people are listening to us now than were when we probably reviewed a lot of those early Batman Beyond episodes, which we covered pretty early on in our run. So a good, maybe more accessible way for some folks to jump on, and we'll talk not only about our original reviews of those episodes that he appeared in, but as you mentioned, appearances in other media as well. And we're gonna try that out with Blight, and definitely, as Cal said, we will be relying on your feedback at DCAU Review on Twitter and Instagram to let us know what you think of that idea and of the character of Blight. Can't wait to discuss all of that with you next week, Cal. But until then, I'm Liam.
And I am Cal.
And we'll be back with another episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.